I mean, we can talk about a new rhetoric emerging from the new communication technologies. I think the best way of understanding how Walter Ong would have evaluated that is from that great chapter heading in Orality and Literacy. Writing changes consciousness. If writing changes consciousness, PowerPoint changes consciousness. If writing changes consciousness, multimedia changes consciousness. The fact that we have more tools to express ourselves changes the way in which we think.
I like to think that Ong would be a fan of multimodal composition. I certainly teach it thinking about his ideas of what is different in different modes.
I don't think everyone realizes what an enormously influential figure Walter Ong was on these wide-ranging areas. And I think this year especially, as we reflect on the 200 years of St. Louis University, it's important to continue to appreciate and honor his legacy.
During his long career at St. Louis University, Walter J. Ong distinguished himself as a founding father in the field we now call media ecology. Like Marshall McLuhan and a few others, Ong was interested in the environment of human communication as it evolved from speech to writing to print and finally to electronic communication through radio, film, television, and digital discourse.
The oral is returning to our culture in ways that we haven't seen for quite a while. And if you walk around SLU's campus and see the number of students with earbuds in their ears, you know he's right, that sound is playing a much greater role than it has in the recent past, as is the visual. Right? Not the visual word on the printed page, but visual images, moving pictures, even static pictures. These things restore a richer sense of what Ong called the sensorium. Media is not just this transparent glass through which we see knowledge, but is something that invites our participation.
So what this setup allows us to do is for students to have multiple dialogues, right? They can meet in small groups with students, they can be talking to the instructor, they can also be sort of by themselves talking with their computer as well.
Ong credited these new technologies with restoring to human communication the power of sound, particularly the sound of music and voice. But much electronic speech was scripted speech, founded upon the technology of writing. To describe these new forms of discourse and explore their implications, he coined the phrase secondary orality.
One of the features of secondary orality is that it's scripted, that it's planned. But another one that we see more in the digital age, particularly with podcasts, is that it's edited. You record quite a bit and then you slice it up and put it back together. It comes down to an issue of authenticity. People, when they see something, they believe it. They think a photograph might be real. But that's really an issue of media literacy, understanding how a photograph is framed to represent something. It's not a mirror of natural life.
One of the things that I always laugh about is when I hear some TV show introduced with live on film. That's a total contradiction.
One of the paradoxes Ong liked to talk about is that in the modern era, we like spontaneity, but we like to plan our spontaneous experiences very, very carefully. And there is a kind of spontaneity there, but it also registers the kind of careful planning that human beings are very fond of.
The insight that Ong had when he considered the newer, if you will, technologies, the post-writing technologies, so radio, film, television. These technologies depend on the written word. So they are not purely oral technologies, but they are a simulation of an oral technology. And so in a sense, we are returning to an earlier way of human being in the world, in an oral culture, except it's one that rests on the foundation of a written culture.
And I know that in all of the scholarship that Walter Ong would have produced, if he was still alive, he would be raising that question. What are you using it for? Are you using it to make yourself more open in your consciousness? Or are you using it to close down the consciousness of others?
Ong shared this concern for possible abuses of the new electronic media, but he was more worried about the mechanistic bias of the broader high-tech culture from which television and digital discourse had emerged. Though he was no technophobe, he recognized the need for a new humanistic rhetoric that could monitor and critique the impact of technology upon society. Nowhere was this more important than in the life sciences and in high-tech medicine.
We stand in awe of technology, right? In medicine, it's accomplished amazing things. The problem is that it operates in a culture that is kind of visually oriented, right? And when we're working with a patient, a lot of times we create an identity for that patient based on things like charts, codes in an electronic medical record, scans, images, all right? And so the danger is that we create actually an identity for the person in those ways, right? Or we think of the patient as kind of a biological puzzle.
One puzzle that was much on Ong's mind was the riddle of human mortality. It would be tragic if medicine were thought of as a technology that might abolish death.
One thing that I heard Ong talk about often is that he felt that he saw certain forces in the culture implying that maybe we don't have to die, that we're going to be able to figure out a way to defeat mortality. And psychologically, that's a very dangerous mode to get into. And if the body is merely a machine that requires replacement parts, then conceivably we could live on indefinitely. And that's a fantasy that is probably against our humanity. For Father Ong, all knowledge is embedded in dialogue. Even our truest and most steadfast philosophical and scientific statements are part of an ongoing dialogue that began arguably as soon as humans achieved voice and will continue into an open-ended future.
I would be delighted to be able to tell Father Ong that we are seriously taking the promotion of conversation that he felt so deeply about. We're taking that into the interactions that happen within medicine. He would be absolutely delighted at that, and delighted at the understanding that we have through our actions of how the best of us in humanity takes shape through the listening that we do with each other and the respect we show each other through the stories we exchange.
In many ways, Ong's approach to technology flows not from the technology, but from the humanity and the ways in which humans create technology, in some ways expressed by one of Ong's colleagues and earlier teachers, Marshall McLuhan, that technologies are extensions of human being.
Ong's thinking pulled together philosophy, literature, theology, and communications into a comprehensive study of the evolution of human consciousness. He brought the past into the present and turned his eyes toward the future. Above all, Walter Ong was committed to a culture of openness and tolerance, grounding these values in his Jesuit commitment to social justice.
Ong said that engagement with the past is engagement with the present. I feel his work is just continuing to unfold. In fact, we need it more now, it seems to me, than ever. The more things become digital, the more information explodes, the more all of the different modes of communication explode, the more we need the one-to-one I-thou relationship with people, the more we need a community of people, the more we need an understanding of how people from different cultures communicate with one another, and more tolerance for those differences.
Certainly Father Ong said some important things about orality, literacy, dynamics. But I think we do him and ourselves a disservice if we read him only for those themes. I think we would do well to read Father Ong as a cultural critic in the same way we read Roland Barthes and Susan Sontag. People who had their recurring themes, but who took these capacious intellects and their vast learning and brought those to bear on the world in which we live.
He saw that it was inevitable. As literacy was inevitable, so is this technological world we live in. And he was going to be very, very careful to tell us, you must pay attention to what you are doing before it becomes the demon that overwhelms. And that is something that I find him to be, the scholar and the priest and the prophet.